In terms of the fourth quarter, they had all but one of their buckets was inside the paint. Was that them just being able to get into the paint and get whatever they want because of that point of attack defense like you were talking about?
Yeah, they had that and 9 free throws.
What happens when a political figure, seemingly polished and relatable, steps into the harsh spotlight of unfiltered critique? When years of carefully managed public image collide with commentators unafraid to dissect every word and decision, there are figures who project calm competence, whose every move is crafted for the camera, but whose actual record sparks questions. And few have faced the kind of no-holds-barred examination quite like Minnesota Governor Tim Walz.
There was inconsistencies in the officiating. Wait until you see the second half. And I have everything.
Caitlin Clark was sidelined with a left groin injury. This marked her 5th straight game on the bench.
Finding out this morning that we probably need to hold out again today. It really is a day-to-day thing. And I think for us, making sure that we're prioritizing her long-term health and wellness. It's anybody who's had some of these types of injuries understand that sometimes it's a process. She's a quick healer and she's been doing everything that she can to get back on the floor. So, we just want to make sure that we're hypersensitive to the big picture.
For years, Walz cultivated an image, a persona built on approachability and a background presented as grounded. He was the teacher, the coach, the military man, a steady hand in a turbulent world. But enter a different kind of arena, the sharp, unsparing world of political commentary, specifically the dynamic duo of Greg Gutfeld and Megyn Kelly. They didn't just critique, they performed a full-blown political demolition derby, leaving nothing untouched. Greg, with his signature smirk and a wit honed to a razor's edge, often sets the stage. He sees the absurdity, the cringe, the underlying chaos beneath the political spin. He's the jester in the court, pointing out that the emperor, in this case Walz, might not be wearing any clothes at all, just a carefully draped blanket of talking points. His initial take wasn't just a critique. It felt like an invitation to watch a train wreck unfold in slow motion, fueled by perceived incompetence and a baffling inability to simply speak clearly. Greg often operates with a kind of gleeful anticipation, a grin that signals someone is about to get flattened, politically speaking, of course. His commentary paints Walz not just as a leader, but as a full-time bureaucrat, a part-time logic dodger, someone who could make beige wallpaper look provocative in his commitment to perceived mediocrity.
Howard looking backdoor for Mitchell, not there. Shot clock down to 7. McDonald feed inside, and it's Howard for 2. It's good record.
But the real cracks started showing when scrutiny turned to the foundations of that carefully built image. A significant controversy arose concerning his military background. Walz, a veteran, had made statements referencing carrying weapons in war, statements that generated significant backlash. Critics quickly pointed out that while he served, he had not deployed to a war zone. When questioned, his campaign offered a clarification, suggesting he had misspoke. However, when Walz himself addressed it, he appeared to distance himself from that clarification, instead pivoting to his pride in his overall service record, both military and in the classroom. This perceived avoidance of a direct answer, the subtle linguistic sidestep, struck many as concerning. It wasn't just a simple mistake. For critics, it cast a shadow over the authenticity of his narrative, raising serious questions about the presentation versus the reality of his service claims. It became less about a grammatical error, as he sometimes seemed to imply, and more about a fundamental discrepancy
Breanna
in how
Stewart,
his record was
Aja
being
Wilson.
portrayed
Wait
to the
until you
public.
see what they did for Kelsey Plum tonight. They get all the calls, touch fouls, anything. And guess what happens? Aaliyah Boston, the best center in the game, and guess what happens to her? She gets called for every touch foul and ends up in foul trouble this entire season and is still putting up MVP type numbers. What happens with Caitlin Clark? Have you ever seen her get a touch foul? A phantom call? No. The physicality, that's the WNBA when it comes to Caitlin Clark. But anybody else, the physicality disappears. And it's foul after foul.
This pattern of shifting narratives and perceived artifice didn't stop there. It permeated his public speaking style. Walls often stated he spoke like they do, like regular people, candidly, with his emotions on his sleeve. But this attempt at relatable sincerity was frequently met with skepticism by commentators like Greg and Megan. They saw it less as genuine connection and more as another layer of the persona, a tactic that often felt clumsy or even disingenuous, particularly when used in conjunction with attempts to deflect criticism. Greg noted this dynamic, viewing Walls's public appearances as an exercise in talking a lot while saying very little of substance. The idea that he wore his emotions on his sleeve was mocked when, for example, he was perceived as bringing up his son to evade answering tough questions about his record. It painted a picture of a politician attempting to appear accessible and authentic, but whose efforts were seen as calculated and often failed spectacularly, leaving him looking like a bumbling knucklehead.
What does it take to get a team to be more consistent, especially from you on the coaching side of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple things. There's always got to be a high attention to knowing personnel. Oftentimes you don't get a lot of practice time, and so going over a lot of their sets, which you do, but at the end of the day, making sure we know our personnel, who we're going to run off the three-point line, what we're willing to give up. We've got to make sure that there's a high attention to detail there.
Yet, when genuine crises hit, the critique shifted from awkward persona to perceived catastrophic mismanagement. The handling of the riots in Minneapolis drew intense fire. Critics argued that leadership was needed most in that moment, but Walls seemed to vanish, or, at best, operate behind a podium with delayed, insufficient responses. Megyn Kelly highlighted this pointedly, noting how his idea of crisis management appeared to involve saying something halfway coherent and then disappearing. The deployment of the National Guard, a crucial step, was perceived as delayed not due to logistics, but because the governor was allegedly prioritizing political optics, calibrating his image before acting decisively. This focus on appearance over urgent necessity, critics contended, wasn't just a misstep. It allowed chaos to escalate. It was leadership that seemed to be more concerned with how things looked than with effectively addressing the unfolding emergency on the ground. The phrase credibility burning was used to describe the impact of this perceived passive response.
Here's Mitchell off the screen, but can't connect on the three. Boston offensive rebound, rolls it in and a foul. The two bigs bring the ball up the floor, and Hamby wasn't ready for that.
How about that change of pace and burst like a guard? Gets downhill to the rim.
This perceived lack of decisive action extended to key policy areas, where inconsistency and confusion seemed to reign. His COVID-19 record, for instance, was dissected mercilessly. Beyond the initial restrictions, critics pointed to the perceived inconsistency of the rules, the exemptions granted, and the selective enforcement that seemed to defy logic. Megyn Kelly famously joked that under Walls's guidance, a barbershop was treated as a biohazard zone, requiring strict shutdowns, while a crowded political rally was simply categorized as people exercising their democratic rights. If logical consistency were a currency, his administration, in the eyes of these critics, was utterly bankrupt. This perceived flip-flopping and lack of clear, consistent reasoning left businesses and citizens alike struggling to understand the rationale behind mandates, further eroding trust and highlighting a leadership style perceived as reactive and driven by shifting winds rather than a steady plan. The economic fallout for small businesses under these selective shutdowns was presented as a direct consequence. A rigged game where the administration seemed to favor larger entities while independent operators suffered.
Lob inside. Boston too far underneath. Shot clock down to 5. Kick out Mitchell. Oh, yes!
Busted them all up. We went to the same high school.
Howard left alone. Answers with a 3.
Then Megyn Kelly entered the fray, bringing a different yet equally devastating style of critique. Where Greg was the flamboyant satirist with a verbal flamethrower, Megyn was the prosecutor with a scalpel, calmly and precisely dissecting Walls's record and statements piece by piece. She wasn't interested in just landing jokes. She aimed to build an airtight case against his governance. Her analysis focused on the specifics, highlighting policy failures and perceived inconsistencies with surgical precision. She approached his career, for example, starting with education, a field he came from. Megyn pointed out the perceived irony of a former teacher presiding over what she described as one of the most erratic educational landscapes in the country. Schools opening, then closing, curriculum in limbo, parents left furious and frustrated. His approach to parental concerns, treating them dismissively or as misinformation, was viewed as baffling, framing legitimate engagement as a viral threat.
LA is so dangerous. They don't look like a 5-win team to me.
Oh, and there's Tipson sending it.
Be Cunningham. Look at this. She literally grabbed her around her neck, and they called this a jump ball, and then threw her.
Policy chaos, however, was just one layer. Perhaps the most striking examples of this disconnect between image and reality, between governing and performing, centered around his perceived obsession with optics and a penchant for policies that struck critics as bizarre or out of touch. Greg Gutfeld often zeroed in on this, arguing that Walz seemed to believe that if he smiled wide enough or posted enough polished tweets, no one would notice the trail of perceived broken policies behind him. His social media team, Greg quipped, seemed to work harder than his actual policy team. Every press photo was cropped just right, every announcement timed for maximum visual impact, as if Minnesota's complex problems could be solved with filters and hashtags. This leadership by illusion, this theater over truth, was never more apparent, perhaps, than in some of his proposed climate initiatives. Greg mocked the idea of trying to turn Minnesota into a Scandinavian utopia, with bike lanes where nobody rides and solar panels on failing roofs. But the ultimate absurdity, seized upon with relish by both commentators, was the suggestion, part of a climate agenda, that residents reduce emissions by mowing less. Yes, the lawn revolution. For critics, it perfectly encapsulated the perception of an administration disconnected from practical reality, brainstorming slogans and theoretical wins while more pressing issues remained.
Off. Then they call this away from the ball in the fourth quarter. Nothing going on. Just to put him at the line, and then Kelsey Plum another one. But when Howard drives and gets slashed across the face, no foul, just out of bounds.
In terms of the fourth quarter, they had all but one of their buckets was inside the paint. Was that them just being able to get into the paint and get whatever they want because of that point of attack defense like you were talking about?
Yeah, they had that and 9 free throws.
Through it all, a central theme emerged in their combined critique. Tim Walz, in their view, isn't a leader in the traditional sense. He's a performer. He issues mandates like a game show host spinning a wheel, hoping for a popular outcome. He treats hard decisions like hot potatoes, tossing them around and hoping someone else catches the heat. He's seen as someone who avoids taking a real stand, preferring the safety of consensus found in surveys and task forces, leading to governance by groupthink. The perception is that he has mastered the art of accountability without consequence, talking, spinning, and performing while critical issues, like rising crime rates, which critics noted while he was allegedly busy brainstorming slogans, persist. Megyn Kelly labeled this spineless ambition, a desire for political success achieved by bending to whatever position seems safest. Greg summarized it as building a career out of sounding sensible while doing the opposite, predicting his legacy would be prolonged confusion wrapped in a feel-good press release.
Fighting against unfair odds. They're missing their best player. They're dealing with injuries and roster changes. Now they have to overcome bad officiating too.
Here is Boston on a handoff to Cunningham. Head full of steam to the rim, and a foul. Cunningham and one.
I mean, this is just a really good screen by Boston to give her a step. The switch. Sophie's having a good time.
So, what does this all mean? Greg Gutfeld and Megyn Kelly, from their distinct vantage points, paint a consistent picture of Tim Walz, a political figure whose public presentation appears frequently at odds with his perceived actions and their outcomes. They see not a steady leader, but an unsteady helmsman, a placeholder, a politician who governs with mirrors, smoke, and just enough charisma to sometimes confuse the issue. His ability to navigate the political landscape despite this relentless critique, his continued presence at the helm, simply provides more material. And as Greg noted, as long as he keeps providing that material, the roast, it seems, is far from over. The question lingers, is this the new model of leadership? A focus on optics and performance over tangible results? Or is it a style destined to eventually collapse under the weight of scrutiny? Only time, and perhaps more commentary, will tell.